Welcome to Swine Time. I'm your host, Spencer Wayne, one of the vets here at the Pipestone Vet Clinic. And today I have with me a guest, Dr. Carissa Odland, and she will be talking to us about antibiotics and antibiotic resistance and use and things that go along with that topic. Carissa is somebody I've known for a long time, and I'll turn it over to Carissa right now. Carissa, welcome. Thank you for being on this podcast. And if you would, maybe introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll start in with some questions about the topic.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Spencer. I'm grateful for this opportunity to get to be a part of the antibiotic discussion. A little background on myself. I've been in charge of the animal welfare program at Pipestone for the last 10 years. And so usually welfare is kind of the area that I get to focus on. And just over the last several years, the conversations around antibiotics and antibiotic resistance has definitely been getting, I would say, louder and more frequent. And obviously from my angle with, the care of the animal, this is definitely something that I felt correlated very closely with my passion for animal welfare, because just having the ability to be able to take care of our animals when they are sick directly correlates with the welfare. And so that was kind of my lead-in then for wanting to learn more about this topic of antibiotic resistance. And specifically, I wanted to kind of understand that when we do use antibiotics in pigs, what is the impact on the different levels of resistance? And then how does that affect these animals from a food safety perspective? So
just to kind of pull it back a little bit, most people out there listening would say, I know what resistance is, but would you just give a real clear definition of what is antibiotic resistance without spending a lot of time on it, just to kind of set the table, like this is what we're looking at, this measurement of this, and explain that.
Yeah, so if we think about just from the basic standpoint, the bacteria that we're dealing with is really the primary bug or pathogen that we use antibiotics for. And so in the event that we would have antibiotic resistance, that would mean that bacteria is not responding to that antibiotic.
Okay, so the producers would see that in a couple forms. One, the drug doesn't work. How come the drug isn't working? Mm-hmm. And the second would be in the form of like lab work. They send some lab work off and they see this drug, this bug, and it shows an R for resistant or an S for susceptible or an I for intermediate or something like that. That would be the level at which the producer is dealing with this, either on some lab work or the drug doesn't work. Is there another way that you would be grappling with this as a farmer? Is it those two things?
No, I think you're spot on. I think, though, what's interesting is, that we may be getting some levels of resistance in the environment as well. And that might not be something that we would necessarily see in the pigs, but that is another piece of some of the research that I wanted to look at.
So I'd like to jump into that right now with you. The reason we wanted you on there is because I would call you an expert, and you're an expert in my mind and other people's minds because you're doing your master's degree project on this topic right now. And so I thought, well, what better person to come and talk to us than Carissa? You could kind of explain your project, what you were hoping to find, and what you found. So if you would, in broad strokes and as detailed as you want to get, just tell us what was the project, what did you do, what did you find, and then we can go from there.
The ultimate goal of the study was to evaluate what was the impact of using antibiotics in these different populations of pigs on their antimicrobial resistance. And basically we were looking at two different types of bacteria, and we kind of picked those two bacteria for two different reasons. One, they did fall within the NARMS food safety approach to surveillance, but then they were also specifically like the commensal indicator bacteria. So we weaned these pigs into a wean to finish research barn, and we had this awesome opportunity to put them into a brand new barn. So we kind of felt that we were able to eliminate that potential confounder from having any previous groups of pigs in there. And then while the pigs were in there, we used a PERS challenge model to try to mimic basically a real world scenario that, our producers that we work with would potentially be going through, where they would want to use antibiotics. And then within that population, we split them into 3 different groups. One of those groups, they did not get challenged with the PRRS virus, and we tried to keep those at minimal or no antibiotic use. And then the other 2 treatment groups, we did challenge them with the PRRS virus, a 174 PRRS virus, so kind of a nasty virus. And then we used 2 different levels of antibiotics in those 2 populations just to try to understand. One was more of a like a moderate or lower level of antibiotics, and the other one was a more intensive round of antibiotics.
Okay, let's stop there for a second, because you got really fancy a little bit ago, and you said things like noms and commensal. What bacteria are you talking about? Is it like E. coli, or what are you measuring? Just as an example, even just one of them, is it something like E. coli you measured, or strep, or what bacteria were you looking at in the project?
Yeah, so as the pigs were in the pens, we would just collect fecal samples and we would test them for both E. coli and Enterococcus, which are normal bacteria that they oftentimes we would be able to culture. And we actually wanted that so then we could test that bacteria and look at the different resistance levels.
Okay, and then you also said something. You said, we challenged with PRRS, because we do a lot of challenge studies, and you challenge the pigs with PRRS, but PRRS, that's not going to be sensitive to antibiotics. It's a virus. I know the reason why I believe, but why don't you explain, why did you do PRRS instead of challenging with, like, throwing some bacteria at it? Why did you do the PRRS challenge?
Yeah, ultimately, we really did just kind of try to set the stage for mimicking a real world scenario where we tend to see, even though it's a primary viral infection, we oftentimes will see secondary bacterial infections. And oftentimes, as the veterinarian, I'll recommend that my producer uses antibiotics in those scenarios. So we were trying to mimic a scenario, a real world scenario where the producer is going to use antibiotics. It wasn't necessarily for the PRRS piece of it, but it was because we know oftentimes in those scenarios that you'll have the secondaries.
Got it. You just made them sick. Basically, PRRS, here you are. You're going to make these pigs sick. We'll find lots of different bacteria that we can then evaluate the resistance on.
Yeah.
Okay, so good. You challenged them. You gave a lot of antibiotics to one group, not a lot to another. And now here's the big question. Like, did a lot of antibiotics make a lot more resistance, or what did you find?
So the important thing to understand, these pigs came from a sow farm. When those pigs were born and lactating or nursing on their mom, we did not treat or use any antibiotics on those pigs or on the sows. However, keep in mind that the sow farm does use antibiotics to treat, control, and prevent diseases. And so just knowing that they came from a population that does use antibiotics, but they did not in their lifetime prior to coming to the trial, the initial testing that really surprised me, it did show that the pigs carried antibiotic-resistant bacteria shortly after weaning, even though those pigs and their moms did not receive antibiotics while they were nursing.
Which I think I saw some of your slides not that long ago, and we were talking about this, and it's really apparent that when you look at resistance, it occurs in the absence of any antibiotic use. Like, they had resistance. We don't even use those drugs, and it just opens your eyes to the truth that resistance is everywhere. And whether you use antibiotics or not, you can maybe select for it, but you were finding resistance to drugs that never had been used, and so it just exists. Is that a fair statement, or how would you frame that up?
Yeah, I think that is a fair statement. I think that we need to learn more and better understand that aspect of it, that we did find resistance to antibiotics that did not or don't get used in this farm. And then we also want to try to learn more about, the potential for how does it move within the environment.
Sure. All right. Well, we're already on, and we could talk about this for a long time. So is anything you got for commentary, Carissa, on just going forward? What do we do now? I mean, as an industry, or even just folks researching it, what's the next thing to learn? What's the next thing to be concerned about as this debate goes forward in the pork producer community, in the veterinary community, in the public? What do we do next?
Yeah. So I think the important thing to take away from this project, so I shared the initial finding that when these pigs got weaned, we did find, antibiotic resistant bacteria. However, what's really interesting was that during the rest of their lifetime in the wean to finish barn, regardless of the antibiotic treatments that they received, there really was, I would say, minimal significant impact on those antibiotic resistant levels. And keep in mind, I was looking at this from what's called the phenotypic aspect, which is similar to what the producer would see if their veterinarian sends in, a diagnostic samples, and it just says, resistant or sensitive. But I think that piece of it is really important for us to continue to learn and maybe reevaluate that on maybe a bigger scale. Some of the next steps that are probably already in play, we would like to look at this from a genotypic standpoint, where we would actually look at the genetic level of resistance and try to understand how does that correlate with the phenotypic piece of it. And then also just, like I said, repeating the project on a larger scale or having multiple repetitions. Because unfortunately for this project, we were only able to do it one time.
Whether you use a lot of antibiotics or not, you really didn't see a different pattern. Is that fair to say? When you did, it's like, we used all this antibiotic in this group that was challenged, and then we didn't use much in here. And in the end, you still found about the same amount of resistance. There wasn't a real difference between the two groups. Is that fair? Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it begs the question of, from the population standpoint, obviously with these pigs coming in with that resistance, some of it, was on regarding antibiotics that had not been used in the sow farm where these pigs came from. So to your point of, antibiotic resistance is present, right, in the environment, and trying to further understand that, but then also replicating this finding that we had where the different levels of antibiotics that we used seem to have very minimal impact on the resistance levels during the actual pig's lifetime. So trying to sort through those two findings.
All right, good review, good to know, and nice summary at the end. Carissa, we're drawing close. We're drawing close to our closing time. I got a couple questions for you that are not related to pigs at all.
Great.
And I've given you these questions ahead of time. We'll see if you figure them out or not. The first question for you is Harriet or Carolyn?
And my answer is Carolyn. Carolyn
is correct. Carolyn is much nicer than Harriet. You are proving yourself as somebody who watched Little House on the Prairie, and if anybody knows you, they would say that if anybody watched Little House, that's you. So Little House on the Prairie, Carolyn is correct. That's the right answer. Okay, 10, 12, 16, 20, or 410.
You have stumped me, Spencer.
The correct answer for you is 20. 20 gauge is about the right shotgun for you. I think you're bigger than a 410. 20. Okay. All right. I'll quit picking on you now. Thank you for being our guest today, and keep up the good work on this. I know for us as a group, just speaking for our veterinary group, this is a topic that we spend a lot of time on, trying to measure it, trying to understand it. And the reason is that it's important. The industry views it as important. The public views it as important. And especially as we turn pork into food, the public eating it will have these concerns, and they're not going away. So we better get good answers for them and help people to understand what's happening.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate it. For our listening public, thank you for tuning in, and tune in next time for more Swine Time podcast. Thank you.